Have you ever wanted to try out Copic markers, but the price point immediately discouraged you from making the first step? In this video, I show you a simple trick how you can start with Copics without ending up broke. I show you how to color a piece like this, just using 4 shades of grey, which means you just have to buy 4 markers. And for that, I already prepared a drawing to walk you right away through the process. I drew the lines in Procreate on my iPad and printed them on marker paper. But if you fancy drawing traditionally, that's completely fine, just go for it. Just make sure you scan your lines before using Copics. I explain why later. I'm starting with the hair, because that's always the most fun for me. It's especially fun with the Copic brush tip, because it's just perfect for creating detailed highlights. For everything else, I'm just laying down a solid layer of color, since I'm not planning on adding any more highlights. Working in grays helps a lot in getting great contrasts between your shapes. It's a technique that is often used by digital artists. In phase 2, I start laying down shadows and rendering elements to create volume. Again, this process is a lot easier in grey, especially when you're a beginner. By the way, if you pick up Copics for the first time, I recommend doing some exercises before you jump right into your first illustration. Try blending a gradient between your tones, and don't skip the infamous sphere illustration. It really helps you to get a feel for the medium. And if you're aiming for creating volumes through blending, that's the way to go. Oh, I haven't talked about my drawing yet. I was in the mood for drawing a manga girl, because for me, Copics are highly linked to manga illustrations. So I started drawing and I wasn't entirely happy with how she turned out. I think mainly her eyes don't resonate with me 100%. But instead of redrawing them, my brain went, birds. Draw some birds and it's gonna be fine. Well, I love the birds, but she still looks a bit weird to me. I'm sure she's great. I picture her being a ranger, protecting the habitat of toucans. So she basically raised those 3 and that's why they're so attached to her. Okay, I think we're done with our Copics. Next step is scanning the artwork and getting it into a drawing software. I use Procreate, but the coloring process will work pretty much the same throughout all major programs. Before coloring, I removed some dust and enhanced the contrast. Since I made this drawing in Procreate in the first place and printed it on marker paper, I have the outlines on a separate layer already in this file. Coloring is pretty easy. You just create a new layer on top of your scanned artwork and set its blending mode to color. Every color on this layer will now pick up the gray tones underneath and transform into different volumes of itself. And now I'm noticing a huge mistake I made. You see, everything gets colored except white. That works awesome for the highlights in the hair, because I want them to be white. But for the skin, as well as the bird's beaks, I only applied shadows and left everything else white. And that means I can't color those areas properly. To fix that, I made an extra layer with a gray base tone and set its blending mode to multiply. Now everything is able to catch color. Problem solved. So let's color the rest. I draw an outline around the shape I want to color and then simply drop the color in there to fill out everything. In Procreate, this works like a charm. I create a new layer for every color I'm using. That gives me the opportunity to easily change every color individually through an effect. Done. We have colors and we have volume, but there's still something missing. What we need now is hue, and that means it needs some color variations. For that, I create a new layer and use it as a clipping mask on top of a color layer. Everything I draw on the new layer will only appear inside the shape I made earlier, and it will automatically join the blending mode. For the hair, I use a more violet red in the shadows and a more orange red on the brighter areas. I continue this for every color and bring the illustration to life. Let's finally talk about the outlines. When using this coloring method, if your outlines are not 100% black, you will most definitely color them as well when using this method. Well, you could just color in very pedantic, but I don't have the patience for that, and that's why I prepared the outlines on an extra layer. Now I can just lay them on top and everything's black again. Another benefit is I can easily change the colors of all lines at once just using an effect, which means I don't have to trace them again if I want to do that, making my life a whole lot easier. For a final touch, I decided to make the beaks more interesting with some patterns. In hindsight, I should have used another brush for that, because the shapes have a very clear edge now and you can see that they are definitely not made with Copic. And I made a gradient for even more color variation. Now let me show you quick all the steps for traditionally drawn outlines. Draw your lines, scan them, use the Copics, scan this one as well, then use the same technique for coloring. Right now I'm doing this one in Photoshop to show you that it basically works the same. And now, take your scanned outlines, brighten the whites and darken the blacks, and change the layer's blending mode to multiply. If you feel your outlines are too harsh, just play a bit with the transparency until you like it. I managed to color these lines as well by creating a layer on top of the outlines and changing its blending mode to negative multiply. Ta-da! We created 2 colorful illustrations only using 4 Copic markers. What do you think? Is that a technique you would use? Or is the digital part throwing you off a bit? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you fancy coloring in my outlines, there's a link down in the doobly-doo. You can get them for free. And if you want to support my work, you can get stickers, art prints and wooden pins at my Etsy store. And now it's time to say goodbye. I hope I will see you in my next video. Until then, have a good one and cheers!